If you've ever found yourself a little bit bored by the standard Forgotten Realms setting of D&D, then I think you might be interested in some of these other settings I'm going to be covering in this video. A few years ago, and I think it was like back in 2018 or something, Questing Beast, the YouTube channel, did a video on 5 obscure D&D settings that you'd never heard of. And that was really inspiring to me at the time, and I thought in the spirit of that video I would do the same. Here are 5 settings for D&D that are very different than the standard Forgotten Realms fantasy. I'm going to be covering them pretty briefly, but I have full reviews of each of these on my channel, so you guys can check them out if you'd like. Now, these are all relatively inexpensive, and in fact, a couple of them are free or pay what you want over on DriveThruRPG, so you can check them out and try them out for yourselves without having to really invest in a full setting. But many of them also have further supplements and things like that that you can buy. And so there's quite a lot to all of these different settings. I want to start off by talking about the Bay of Spirits, which is a medieval fantasy setting for sort of just a system-neutral game, really. It's for old school D&D, and that's going to be true for all of these, that they're more in the old school than, contemporary D&D settings or D&D rules. They're more for OSR games, like Old School Essentials or Dungeon Crawl Classics even, or Shadow Dark, or Swords and Wizardry, or any of those old school games. But they're adaptable to modern D&D if you like to do that. They're probably going to take a little bit more work to adapt if you want to add them to a sort of 5th edition game or something like that. The Bay of Spirits is really, really cool, and it's the most, I would say, traditional of the 5 that I'm going to be covering today. It's sort of a standard medieval fantasy setting, at least on the surface, but the art is so good, and it draws you into this particular world. And in addition to that, there's a lot of really cool history, lore, and it has a very unique vibe that isn't kind of the high fantasy that we see elsewhere. I'm briefly going to go through, again, the main core book here, but there's quite a few supplements that have been released for the Bay of Spirits, and that's one downside to the setting, is that you kind of have to go through many books in order to get the whole thing. You're going to have to compile a lot of different information together. But each individual supplement is standalone, so you don't need them all to run any of them. As you can see, the art is fantastic, both the cartography and the illustrations of people, NPCs, and things like that. It's really, really cool. You get a brief overview of what you're getting in this book. This one's pretty short, only 49 pages. This is the kind of core of the setting. You get the overview, life around the Bay, how the feudal system and the culture of the Bay work, the rulers and the factions and things like that, the different settlements. The idea behind this particular setting is that it is a very large bay with some islands and things like that, and then a very, very wild mainland, which has only just been kind of investigated and settled. Maybe in the past it was more developed, but now it's been overgrown a bit. So you're going to be doing a lot of navigating from island to island. You're going to be sailing, not on the high seas, but, in a bay, and there are a lot of really cool islands and things like that you're going to be going through. The art throughout this book is delightful, and you get a lot of help in approaching, sort of understanding this particular feudal setting. It really does lean into this idea of a feudal world, and a lot of attention has been paid to the hierarchy and the structure, the factions, and the way that it connects to sort of the broader world. But the broader world is not detailed. You get a lot of really cool ideas throughout as well. Little bits of information, optional rules, whether for sort of a mechanic in a mechanical way or just sort of generic. You get an overview of the inhabitants, and while at first it may look pretty low magic, you actually do get these spikes of high magic here. For example, these spires that you find throughout the ruins of the ancients scattered throughout the bay are really, really cool, and they connect to perhaps powerful artifacts and things like that. The touchstone that it suggests is, imagine pagan Celts stumbling upon the ruins of ancient Egypt or Sumeria, right? So instead of going into the really, really wild, wacky, weird gonzo, this setting goes into more grounded fantasy. But even within that, there's quite a lot you can do to make things seem fantastical and mysterious. As you can see, the art is just great, and the cartography of the dungeons is excellent. The maps are mostly isometric, but you get these really fantastic locations. And in fact, one of the things I want to show you guys is one of the adventures for this setting that you can get. This is the Haunt of Crow Gulch. First of all, that image is just beautiful. And that castle makes you want to investigate it, right? But as you go through this particular adventure, you'll see a lot of great art that draws you right into the setting, and the cartography, again, is really, really good. One of the things that I like about it is that while the writing gives you, enough information to describe things to your players, very often you don't even need the paragraph because you have a very beautiful piece of art or a map that gives you the sense visually of what the place is like. And so you can just look at it and then describe what you're seeing to the players, or you can describe what it would be like to stand in that place. Because, of course, your players aren't going to have a bird's eye view. There's a lot of bits of information here and a lot of little, you might say, pieces of world building throughout all of these books. And that's why I say if you want to get the whole setting, if you want to get the whole world, you are going to have to do a bit of compilation and reading through some of these handbooks because, a little bit of information about this lord or that lord, a little bit of background might be given in this or that book. And so, again, you kind of need them all if you want the full setting. But they're all standalone. And therefore, you don't have to get the whole collection to run any one of them. This particular dungeon is, of course, about the ruin above a town, a small town. And so, of course, the dungeon is given a map later, but there are several locations on the climb up the falls to the ruin itself. And as you can see, granted the setting is grounded and sort of in its, it's a more realistic fantasy world, you still get places like this, right? And you get harpy lairs, and you have elves and half-orcs, and you have magic, and you have, fae and fairies and things like that in the world that very clearly make this a fantasy world. This is not just another take on medieval Europe or something like that. This is a fantasy world that has a lot to it. This is what I wanted to highlight, though, is the cartography. You get just these beautiful pieces of art, almost, rather than maps. I mean, they are maps, obviously, and they serve as maps. But as you're going through, you can just look at what the thing looks like and describe that to your players. This is another great example. One of the locations as you're climbing up the mountain is this crevasse. And that map on the right gives you just a visual layout of the place. You can read through the description, and it's helpful, but you can also just look at this and describe to your players as they're going through what they're seeing. That's fantastic, and most of the adventures in this setting are like that. So I highly recommend you guys check out this setting, the Bay of Spirits. It's by Roan Studios. Randy M. is the creator of this, and he does some cartography in other books and adventures too, but this is his setting. I'll put a link below to where you guys can get it. Each individual book is very, very cheap, maybe $1 to $3. This one is only $3, the standard book, and the adventures tend to be about $1, $2. So you can get a ton of the setting for very cheap. And the whole thing is still pretty cheap as well if you put it all together. This will help scratch the sort of more grounded fantasy itch than Forgotten Realms does, right? Forgotten Realms especially spikes into the very high fantasy, super heroic fantasy. This is not going to go that direction. Now, you could play this, as I said, in 5th edition, and then you're going to have that kind of spike of high magic and a more superhero-y game. But if you were to play this with an old school game, then you're probably going to find it fits the tone of the world a bit better. The next setting is still on the more grounded side, but it's starting to move into a different genre of fantasy, and that's sort of Arthurian, high chivalric romantic fantasy, with a hefty dose of fairy tale and fae in there as well. This is the Northern Tier, which is by Rose Throne Publishing. It was created by W.R. Beatty. This is such a fantastic setting, and the core book for this and many of the supplements are free, so you don't even have to. You can just download it and see if you like it before you really try it out. There are a lot of adventures written for this as well, quite a few, and they're integrated with the world in really cool ways. Those cost some money, but you can get the main book and the monster manual and things like that without having to spend any money at all. And so you can get a sense of the world, start to see if you'd like it, and then you can go into it. Now, this world is mostly, the art for this world is mostly public domain. Some of it's been modified. The maps are usually maps that are found online. There are a few that are made for this particular adventure. Dyson Logos maps feature prominently in some of the adventures. But the public domain art has been chosen to be really, really, what you might say, unified with the setting and the tone that's trying to be created here. And the Northern Tier is one of my favorite settings out there. As you can see, the art is fantastic. Public domain, but it draws you into the world very, very well. Now, this is old school in its sensibilities, not just in terms of the suggested game and the system that you might want to use for this, which really should be probably any old school game like, again, Old School Essentials or Swords and Wizardry or something like that. Again, you could adapt it to a more modern game like 5th edition D&D, but it would be a little bit harder. Still, I would recommend checking it out and seeing if you want to make that sort of adaptation. Because the tone of this world and the ideas that this world gives you are just incredible. It's designed as a bit of a hex crawl, but there are more, you might say, adventure through lines. You can get sequences of adventures, for example, when you buy the adventure packs and things like that, that will give you a bit of a story if you would like a more narrative campaign. But you really don't have to do that at all. This single book, the Northern Tier core book, you might say, which is free in PDF form, gives you everything you would need for a hex crawl adventure, a more sandbox adventure, including encounter tables, lots of encounter tables, and lots of cool, flavorful encounter tables. But lots of individual hexes and locations in those hexes as well as some magic items, weather tables, how to create adventures in the Northern Tier, and things like that. Again, the idea here, the tone that it's sort of a medieval feudal world, but as you can see, it leans much more heavily into the religious and into the fairy than something like the Bay of Spirits does. While both of them have that more grounded feeling than something like Forgotten Realms, this one leans more into Arthurian, I would say, elements. It's beautiful. And the tables are the highlight of this core book. The adventures, and I'm going to go through one in a second here, are pretty good. But the tables themselves are the things that really, really stand out. You get, NPC encounters, descriptions of those NPCs, each of them detailed quite well, stat blocks given in simple OSR terms, as well as some additional role tables if they would apply to that NPC. Even when you get the mundane encounters later in the book, they're still pretty good, and there's a lot of ways of making them more interesting by making them happen in interesting locations or having interesting weather happening while you're having that regular encounter. So a fight with a bear is one thing, but a fight with a bear while lightning is striking the region, that's much more interesting. You have dangerous encounters, which are more, dangerous, and they're dealing with a bit more of the higher fantasy side of things. And then when you get to the special encounters, this is where I think the encounter tables really shine. You get very particular encounters that each have a page devoted to them. And they're going to be variable and modifiable with role tables. This is so cool. And they're all straight out of folklore, fairy tale, Arthurian legend, and romance. They're so good. Even if it's something as simple as the peasant cart. Well, what is the peasant carrying? What is the secret of this peasant? What is the condition? What's the secret that the peasant himself knows? And what is the value of the cargo? Even something like that. This is not just a regular peasant, after all. This is a peasant who can curse. And this is some sort of strange being. He's known as the peasant. He looks like a peasant. His stats aren't terribly high, but he's not normal. The White Lady and the Black Knight, monks of the fallen fire, Mother Saccharin and her hovel. The boy who dug 15 graves, the Welva or Velva, I'm not sure how to say that. But you get the point. These are really, really cool encounters, and there's a lot of great ideas for them. And each of them, if the players are going to encounter them, are going to give them a very strong feeling of what this setting is like and what they can expect from the rest of the world. Now, not only is there really great sort of random encounters as I'm clicking through them, but you can find that the hex crawl is similar. The hex crawl has 42 different hexes. Most of them have one location, some of them have 2 or 3, but all of them are interesting. All of them have a full page layout, at least a page layout, and they have role tables for variability and connections to story threads and hooks throughout the whole region, connections to other hexes and NPCs from the encounter tables. This whole setting is very well knitted together, you might say. As you can see, this one's a 2-page spread for a hex, but many of them are just on 1 page, and they're all good. Here's a little dungeon, the Old King's Watch. Now, I want to talk about this one in particular because you don't get a map in this one, but you do get the layout that you're going to find in a lot of the adventures, which is sort of paragraph texts with a little bit of bolding and some references to other adventures or other things like that. You might not find that is exactly your style, especially if you're more used to old school writing games where things are bullet pointed and italics and hyperlinked. So there's going to be a little bit of getting used to a more ponderous style. That's what you might see throughout this whole book. But what makes this particular setting, I think, relatively easy to enter into, even with that more heavy style, is that the writing is just good. The writing draws you in, and the turns of phrases, the colloquialisms used, it all lends to sort of the breadth of the whole setting in particular. And so you really do feel, as you're reading through this, like you're getting a better sense of how to run the game, even though it's not giving you necessarily advice on how to run the game or this particular setting. That's so cool. It's not like it's, thee, thou writing. It's not, Middle English or something like that. But it is just the overall presentation and the overall way that these paragraphs are written and the sorts of, again, turns of phrases that are used help you get into the mindset of a more chivalric medieval fantasy. So even though a dungeon might be laid out in a way that's not particularly easy to navigate sometimes, especially with the longer adventures, the maps are usually quite good and helpful, although there isn't one provided here. And the, again, overall tone of it is quite good. I highly recommend you guys check out the Northern Tier. It's a beautiful setting, it's a beautiful world, it's very well presented, the public domain art draws you right in, and again, this core book is free over on DTRPG, so you can download it, read through it, and see if you like it. And if you do, then you can jump in and get some of the other adventures that do cost some money. I'll put a link below to where you can get it, and I highly recommend it for those of you who want a more Arthurian, chivalric, grounded, not as high magic, not as wild, certainly not superhero fantasy, but something more grounded than what we find in the Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk even. Now this is where we leave grounded behind. The Planar Compass zines are a really cool take on the Spelljammer setting from 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons back in the day. I know that 5th edition has released a Spelljammer setting to mixed reviews. This is excellent. It's designed for old school essentials, and so there's going to be a lot of mechanics that you're going to have to adapt or ignore if you want to use a different system. But I highly recommend you guys check this one out as well. Once again, the first zine in the set is free in PDF form, so you can download the first one and check it out. But in my opinion, the first zine, while good, isn't where the whole setting, the whole zine really starts, the set really starts to come out. That's the second one. The second one is when it starts to get really, really good. Now, they've only released a handful so far, but I imagine they're going to keep releasing these as they go forward. They seem to do one every couple of years or one every year, so it is a bit of a wait between. But with what they have released right now, you have more than enough to get started and to have quite a long campaign already in this setting. The first book has sort of a home base, a location, an island in the Astral Sea. If you're not familiar with the Spelljammer idea, then essentially what you're dealing with is the space between planes, the Astral Sea. And rather than navigating it just purely through magic or teleporting through it or floating even through it, the way that the creatures of the Astral Sea navigate is by using ships. Now, sometimes those ships are sailing ships with actual sails, and sometimes they're giant nautiluses with tentacles, and there's a lot of psionics and creatures that move you through the great nebulae between these planes. But it's really, really cool. And there are islands within that Astral Sea that have a lot going on there. Because you're connected to many different planes, this is sort of a plane hopping setting, you can bring in almost anything. Any world, any setting can be a sub-plane within the Planar Compass world. Now, there are a lot that are suggested, especially in the second zine, but you could bring in whatever you want. So this is sort of a catch-all in that sense. It's sort of the substrata of your world you could have be this sort of astral plane, and the players could use this as sort of a navigation between them. Now, this particular book, as I said, details one island and one particular location, a sort of safe harbor called Dreamhaven. And Dreamhaven is a pirate port. There are pirates there, merchants there, castaways from the Astral Sea that end up there, and it is a great hub for a bigger campaign, which is why it's presented here. There are some adventures in this place as well, and a dungeon beneath, which is probably not going to be where you start off. You're probably not going to run the dungeon, because if you do, you can end up destroying Dreamhaven entirely, and thus ruining your central campaign hub. So maybe this would be a dungeon that you come back to at a later point in the campaign. But you could run it straight up. Now, the art in the first book is not as good, in my opinion, as the art in the second. It's fine, and it gets you into the mood of the place. But the cartography, the presentation of the zine itself seems to, in my opinion, get really going in the second one. And that's why I want to take a quick look at the second one in a little more detail than the first. Granted, the first one is really cool. It's the second one, in my opinion, where things really get going. First of all, the covers of these books are awesome. But as you get into the book itself, here's the multiverse in brief that is detailed, well, I shouldn't say detailed, that is indicated in this book, along with a whole bunch of planes, their descriptions, the inhabitants of those planes, the known portals to those planes, and the distance from that central hub of Dreamhaven. So again, this book assumes you're going to be using Dreamhaven as sort of your adventure, this is a player's retreat. It's where they're going to go between adventures. But this book has a lot more for running in the world than the first zine does. The first zine details that location. The second zine details things like monsters, pirates, the different ships you can use, the different magic items you can find, and the sequence for sailing through the astral sea, which involves things called hex flowers. It's a really interesting take on the traditional run through an adventure, or I should say the traditional navigation kind of adventure. It also has a dungeon towards the end and adventure hooks, and a minigame for astral fishing, which is great. But as you can see, the presentation has been, in my opinion, stepped up a notch in the second scene, and that continues through the rest of the sequence, or through the rest of the series, excuse me. You get, I think, just a better, kind of fantastical presentation than in the first book. You get a bunch of monsters with cool art throughout. That's a pretty nasty creature. You get a little comic book. And what I find to be the best part of this whole book are the ships themselves. They're really cool. You get a few suggestions here, but of course, once you have the basic idea behind these ships, you can do much more. You can go further. The Tortuga, that's a great one. You get some magic items, and then you get the hex flowers and how to use them. And essentially, you use these hex flowers instead of presenting a physical space for your, astral sea. Because it's the astral sea, it's the place between planes, you don't have a particular physical, three-dimensional space for it. Instead, you're going to be using will and time to navigate through it using your ships. And obviously you are traveling to different locations, but space is weird. And so to mimic that, you have this sort of procedure for travel, which involves the kinds of encounters you're going to get through in a certain amount of time, rather than a particular, I would say, location to go through. For example, this isn't a particular portion of space. This is the hex flower that you would use whenever you travel between two locations. So regardless of how far it is on the astral sea, regardless of where your starting point and where your ending point is, you're going to use something like this hex flower, which has particular kinds of encounters, particular kinds of locations that are spread out throughout it. And depending on what the players roll and how they navigate, with a little bit of choice, because they can use points to help nudge themselves to different kinds of encounters, they do have choice. It's not simply random. And so they can navigate, and this mimics a little bit the idea that, you're dependent upon wind and tide, but you also, the kind of navigator you have, the kind of ship you have, your experience, that all matters for getting around the astral sea. So it's a really cool idea. And the hex flower is used not just for the actual navigation, but also for weather and also for the nearby planes. And this is an important point. The entire astral sea is floating, you might say, over all of the different planes that it's connected to. And so depending on where you are in the astral sea, you might be closer or further away from particular planes. But notice that this isn't the same as the kind of encounters or even the islands you're having, because it's not quite the same sort of space. Other dimensions intrude into the astral plane at particular times, but not always. And not always in the same place, and not always in the same planes. So which plane you're near is just as varied as what kind of encounters you're having, what kind of weather you're having, and again, what islands you're nearby. So it's flexible and shifting. There's obviously some ways of navigating that. You can shift closer and further away from the planes, just like you can shift closer and further away from weather or from the particular locations or encounters. But it's not the same table. It's not the same. You're rolling for each of these. So you could, one travel between two locations. You could go near the plane of fire, or you could go near the plane of air, and have the same sorts of islands in between, the same sort of weather in between. This book is fantastic. This setting is fantastic. And the zines that are being released for it are further developing particular subplanes. The plane of Ord, for example, is one of the ones that's detailed. Ordo, which is the plane of order. It's clockwork, and it's all very, very structured. It's the plane of law. That's one of the ones that's detailed in a later zine in the series. I highly recommend you guys check this out if you're interested in something that's a little less grounded, if something that's a little bit more wild and intentionally entering into the high fantasy, high imaginative settings, rather than Forgotten Realms. Once again, Forgotten Realms is a little bit constrained, and I know there's planar travel and all of that, but you can add this as a sort of more explicit, hey, we're going to be playing a planar campaign, and we're going to, lean into that imaginative, maybe catch-all nature of the Spelljammer world. So I highly recommend you guys check out Planar Compass. Again, the first PDF is free. You might as well download it and check it out just to see if you like it. And then if you do, you can keep going with the series. For a very different kind of wave crawl, Windwraith. Now this is less of a particular setting and more of a toolkit for generating your own wave crawl setting. This is for actual waves, not astral waves. But the kinds of settings you're going to be generating with Windwraith are going to be similar. It's worth noting that the description of this is a post-apocalyptic ocean world, and there's a fair element of gloom, grimness, and maybe even body horror throughout this whole book. But it's such a good generative setting, and the ideas throughout it are so good. This is by Lazy Liches, and they do a really great set of books. This is a standalone book, though. It doesn't really fit with the others or fit with the other adventures. You could always take them and put them in this, but it's its own thing. As you can see, this is a much longer PDF. This is 179 pages, and you get everything from different classes and backgrounds all the way through to the world generation, the sea generation, how to generate tyrants, which is a very important element of a post-apocalyptic world, how to generate the islands themselves, NPCs, the ships that you're going to be using, the different arcane constructs that are present on some of these islands at least, the different monsters that you can find, and then some miscellaneous appendices with special tools like new classes, further new classes, how to generate potions and treasure and getting rare treasure, advanced treasure, and of course how to explore underwater, which is an important element of any game set on the ocean. The art throughout this book draws you in a very powerful way, but it's of a very particular type and kind. It's worth noting, again, that the setting is going to probably have a few, whichever setting you generate using this toolkit, it's going to have some similarities to other settings generated within this toolkit, obviously, right? There are certain assumptions, and the output is going to look similar. So you can think of it as one setting, but your particular setting is going to differ from anybody else's. Here's some of the art, as I mentioned, and it's flavorful and it draws you in, the arcane constructs that you can run into, but it has that element of grim, maybe body horror even, and you'll see that throughout. Very interesting, very cool. This is sort of a quick start and a pre-made island for you just to get you in the right mindset and maybe to run with your players. You get a few locations, you get the island itself, but it really is just to sort of, hey, here is the kind of islands you might generate with this book. Here's the kind of adventures you might have with this book. And it's a pre-made one, so you have it all ready to go for you. You get, that's even before you get into the character creation, character generation tools. You get sea elves, you have the entomologists. As you can see, the art here, very fascinating. A little disturbing maybe, but really cool. Here the overview for generating your world, how to divide your seas into different boundaries, how to distribute islands well through that place. Key islands, developing them and trade routes, and then a cataclysm that throws everything off. That's really cool. The vibe here is very much grim, but not despairing. And that's something that I find to be nice. I'm not a big fan of despairing settings. This is not in that vibe. You're going to be able to control a lot of that yourself with the kinds of villains, the kinds of heroes, the kinds of world you build, the kind of NPCs and adventures, the kind of monsters you put into it. And while a lot of these are of a very particular type, they're not all of that type. How the sea works, how portals work, how to distribute them, you get the point. This is an entire toolkit for creating your own oceans and for the different ocean depths and the ideas behind them. Here's a nice little template for a sea map that you get. Tyrants and the different soldiers of that tyrant generation tables, and particular tyrants that are generated for you. The Windwraith with their timeline of dreams, the Static Empress, and the cataclysms that caused her or can cause her. The Carrion King, another great one. how to generate tyrant bases, the islands. Island campaigns are fantastic. They're easily understood by both players and GMs, and the GM, you can create discrete regions and adventures which are controlled. Because the players can choose many options, they can sail where they'd like to go, but once they're there, they're there. And so it's a self-contained point. And so this really helps you with the idea of a point crawl and generating that sort of idea, that sort of world, that sort of campaign. This can get pretty particular with the particular resources that are available on each of these islands, from lead and copper to shellfish and berries, with basic, advanced, and rare resources, so you can really get into the particulars of the island and why the players might want to go there and why the settlements might want to be, why settlements might want to start there. But also you have this sort of generation of structures on your island, and that can get pretty particular as well. What material is it made of? What's the state of repair? What's the quality? What are the structure traps and enchantments? Because again, this is post-apocalyptic. So there are going to be a lot of those things left over. The populations who are left over on the islands. Who are they and what do they want? You get the idea, once again. Really cool. One of my favorite parts is the moving island section. So I highly recommend you guys check out Windwraith as well. A generative wave crawl setting toolkit. The kind of world you build at the end of this is going to be very different from any other world out there. And while the different settings that you generate with this toolkit are going to be similar, even within that, there's a huge variety. And so much of it depends upon what you roll and what you choose to include. This is a great supplement and a great setting in its own right. And finally, something very different that's going to be really out there for your players. The Electrum archive, which is detailing the world of Orn through a series of zines. This is science fantasy. So imagine a combination of Dune and Nausicaa, Valley of the Winds, with maybe a little Dark Sun thrown in there for good measure. This is by Emil Bovin, and it's incredibly imaginative. Now, this is both a setting and a system, but you could leave the system aside and just take the ideas here for this world. It's really cool. Now, this is not the only zine so far. I think 2 have been released, each of them detailing different parts of the world. But the art draws you right into this book, just like the others have said, and the world itself is sort of a massive point crawl with tons of great ideas. One of the interesting aspects of this setting is that gold is just so common that it's basically worthless. And instead, people use ink, sort of magic ink, and magicians use it to inscribe spells, and people use it to smoke. Basically, they inhale it, and it opens up their minds and gives them magic. You can get pretty addicted to it, though. And it's also used as currency because it's so valuable. It's a little like the spice from Dune. It's a lot like the spice from Dune. The world itself is a sort of desert planet, or desert world, or at least this region of it that's described seems very desert-y. As I said, this is a full system, not just a setting. And so if you're not interested in using the system of choice, you might have to do some adaptation. But it's very, I would say, system neutral in terms of the world. The world could be applied to a lot of different games, including 5th edition, fairly easily. Because of that ink, you could change the way that warlocks work, for example, or the way that wizards prepare their spells, and move it into a more in-world exploration, where wizards are preparing a certain number of spells based on how much ink they've inhaled, or something like that. You do get some base classes in the book, but really what I'm kind of pointing you guys to is the world itself, which is detailed as you move forward, about halfway through the zine, and a lot more in the second book as well. A brief timeline of the world of Orn. You read through this and you get a very clear sense of what's going on. Essentially, this is not shying away from spaceships. The Elders, who are this alien race, came and brought humans, settled them on this world, and then left. And so humans are not native to this world. They are a colonizing race, you might say. And there is a lot going on here. You can see touchstone definitely of Dark Sun as you go through if you're familiar with that setting. It's really cool. Elder Ink and what the realm beyond is and how to reach it. The different factions of this world, which heavily influenced by Dune as well. And you get the Electrum Sea, which is where you're going to be doing most of your adventuring. The Spore Wilds, the Spirit Roads, the City of Bones. Different plot hooks and encounter tables, different locations and what's within those locations. sub-hooks, sub-encounters for each region. This is a full setting. It's really, really cool. The art is great, draws you right in. Now again, if you really want to make the most of this setting, you're probably going to have to use the system designed for it. But if that's a deal breaker, if you're just like, no, I'm interested in a setting, not a system, then don't worry, because there are so many good ideas in this world that you can just take the world itself. You'll leave out a little bit, you'll have to do a little bit more work adapting it, but it's still worth it. Such a cool setting, such a cool world. And the second one is just as good, although I'm not going to go through it. The art, again, draws you right into the world. The whole thing is flavorful, the whole thing is cohesive and coherent, and very imaginative. And what you might say, the genre feeling, the vibe at the table, is going to be much more coherent than what we often get with a more traditional high fantasy setting like Forgotten Realms. I know I've been criticizing Forgotten Realms a lot, but don't get me wrong, I think you can have a ton of fun with the Forgotten Realms. But I think a lot of people are getting tired of it or have become tired with it. And if you are, well then one of these 5 settings is for you. Again, I've looked through the Electrum Archive, Windwraith, Planar Compass, the Northern Tier, and the Bay of Spirits. I think they're all excellent settings, and I highly recommend any of them. I'll put links below to where you guys can get them. Try them out. I think you'll find that you and your table, you and your players, have a lot of fun. Maybe even more fun than what you're currently having with whatever maybe more generic setting you've been sticking with so far. All right, guys. Well, I hope this has been interesting to everybody, and I'll see you all in another video.